Last time I talked about the scientific method as it sort of developed through the scientific revolution. But I think it's actually misleading to talk about the scientific method as though there's just one. There's a bunch of different methods used in science, and they've continued to develop pretty much continuously throughout history, right up until the present day. So this time, I want to talk a little bit about the developing scientific method throughout kind of the 1800s until the mid-1900s. I want to give you an example of how the scientific method has continued to develop until pretty recently. And if you follow this history further than I'm going to go this week, you'll see that it continues to develop. So the idea of using placebos as a control in medical studies probably strikes you as pretty obvious, perhaps. Like it's such a clear idea in most people's heads that you can't imagine not doing it this way. But it turns out to be a pretty recent innovation in testing medicine, and it comes with a pretty interesting history. So that's what we're going to talk about this week. Hopefully you're familiar with the basic idea of a double-blind, placebo-controlled randomized study, but I'm just going to go through it really, really briefly right now in case you're not. So a double-blind trial. Double-blind means both the patient and the doctor doesn't know whether you're getting real medicine or a placebo. Typically, you're comparing a medicine to a placebo, that is a fake medicine, and neither you nor the doctor knows which one you're getting, so that you're not influenced by believing that you're getting the medicine, and the doctor's not influenced in evaluating the results by confidence that you either are or aren't getting the medicine. So people are typically separated. You get a bunch of patients, you randomly separate them into two or more groups. That's the randomization part of randomized placebo-controlled double-blind study. And then given either real medicine or fake medicine, and nobody in the trial is supposed to know which group is which until the end. So that's the basic idea. So if you're familiar with clinical trials at all, that idea probably strikes you again as really obvious, right? That's just such a natural and clear thing to do. But this is a prime opportunity for history to do what it's really good at, which is to take something that looks obvious to us and unwind the obviousness by going through how it developed so that we can see that it's actually the product of a kind of long process of thinking and working through different ideas. It's the product of a long social process, and that's what we're going to look at today. So think about this in the following way. Like, imagine you're a doctor from basically anywhere in the world 1,000 years ago, and I come up to you and I say, "Hey, I got this really great idea." Instead of really getting to know your patients and thinking hard about their individual cases and relying on medicine that you've seen work a bunch of times, and really like trying to pick just the right medicine for just the right individual, what if instead of all that, you just try a bunch of stuff? So just give a bunch of sick people either medicine or nothing and see what happens. And furthermore, you shouldn't know whether they're getting the medicine or the nothing at all, because I think that your extensive, say you've been in medicine for like 30 years, I think your 30 years of experience treating people is actually confusing you rather than helping you. I don't think most doctors would, if you put it that bluntly, would go, "Oh yeah, obviously that's a good idea," to just like cut my experience and knowledge out of the process of evaluating purported medicine. Try it again from the sick person's perspective. So the doctor says to you, "You know what? I'm not actually sure that this medicine that I've been giving to people for years and years actually works. So here's what I propose. I'm going to either give you that medicine or nothing at all just to see what happens." Are you going to go for that? I'm probably not, right? Like, until the idea of placebo-controlled trials became common in Western culture, I think most people would find that a bit abhorrent. What do you mean you're not going to give me medicine, right? Like, you're going to give me nothing just to see what happens because you're not sure whether your medicine actually works? Like, it sounds quite weird if you're not already familiar with this. So the idea of placebo-controlled trials, especially a double-blind trial, depends on a very different idea of medical authority than was common pretty much throughout history. So there are many different ways of constructing medical authority. So why do you trust a doctor? That's the medical authority. Different cultures have had different ways of thinking about this, but very, very common throughout history and throughout cultures has been the idea that the doctor is an expert. That is, the doctor has a whole lot of experience with trying stuff on patients and seeing what happens to their kind of unique case history. They have a lot of personal authority. That is, the doctor with a lot of experience has been understood to be the one that's most likely to be able to find a cure for you. Whereas a brand new doctor, maybe you want them overseen by a more senior doctor, something like that. So personal experience of the doctor themselves with seeing patients, trying medication, and carefully observing what's happening has been an essential component of medical authority for pretty much every culture that I'm aware of up until basically the end of this story. Now, what I'd like you to think about here is what a kind of stunning reversal it is to have a placebo-controlled trial, double-blind trial, where precisely the experience and judgment and personal knowledge of the doctor, not just of their experience, but of the individual patient, all of that is being specifically and carefully excluded, right? You got 30 years of medicine, you've tried a bunch of stuff, you've seen what happens, you've seen any number of case histories, and what the placebo-controlled double-blind trial does is remove that experience from the equation. So it's an odd concept if you think about it in those terms. The things that used to be not the only part of medical authority, of course, the belief in the theories of medicine at the time also typically form a component of medical authority, and seeing what happens, the actual sort of experience of the medications and the treatments also form a component, but personal experience of the doctor and knowledge of individual case studies are being removed from the story here. What a interesting way of flipping around the way we think about medical authority. And it's if you think about it in those terms, I think it's not hard to see why people didn't immediately jump on this, or this hasn't been the way we've thought about it for all of history. It's in the last 100 years or so that this has really sort of taken off. And when it was first introduced into Western medicine, the place it was first introduced was not into standard medicine. So we're going to dig into the readings in this video and the other video where we see the sort of slow development of the idea. And the first place that the author Kapchuk locates these kind of blind studies, at least, was in what you might politely call irregular medicine, what you might impolitely call quackery. So a quack is like a fake doctor. So it was irregular, non-standard, non-mainstream medicine that blind studies were first applied to. And it was only very slowly that the idea that this procedure should be applied to standard mainstream medicine kind of develops. So let's dig into the readings, talk a little bit about mesmerism. Okay, so the first case that Kapchuk thinks that he can find in the literature. So notice how careful he is about his way of putting this. He doesn't say, this is definitely the first ever case of a blind study. What he says is, the first case that I could locate in the literature was mesmerism. So before I get into this sort of blind test, let me describe to you what mesmerism was. And if you can see this image here, you get some idea of what it is. It's a doctor sort of using a non-physical force to manipulate the life energies of the subject. Mesmerism was invented by this guy, Franz Mesmer, who was a German doctor. He wrote his dissertation on medical theory, the theory that he believed that the movement of the planets and the moon had an effect on people's bodies. Now, if you recall, learned medicine at the time, this is the 1800s, sort of late 1700s, mid to late 1700s, learned medicine, the medicine that they taught in universities, was based on, at least partly based on, astrology, right? So your sun sign, your star signs, would be part of your medical diagnosis. So the idea that the moon and the sun and the planets have something to do with human health was not at all new here. What Mesmer was doing that was new was not using astrology exactly, but he was trying to build a kind of medical theory based on the relatively recent ideas of Isaac Newton. So, as you're hopefully familiar, Isaac Newton produced a theory about how the gravity of the sun keeps the Earth in orbit, the gravity of the moon creates the tides. So these very distant objects, Newton argues, have important effects on us here on Earth. And there's this, so according to Newton, there's this kind of invisible field that permeates the universe that we can't really feel directly, but that has crucially important effects on everything around us. So that's the idea that Mesmer is trying to sort of build into the medical theory at the time. And so following his idea that the movement of the moon, so the movement of the moon causes tides here on Earth. I hope that's a familiar idea to you. The moon goes around the Earth, and the gravitational attraction of the moon pulls water towards it. That's what causes the tides. That's as far as everybody knows. That anybody thinks now, that's real. Okay, so Mesmer believes that something similar happens inside the human body, that you've got tides somehow inside your body. And Mesmer, developing this theory, tried to artificially induce what he called tides inside a patient's body by having them ingest a compound which contains some iron, and then using magnets on their body to try to move stuff around. This was an attempt to cure hysteria. Hysteria is this term with a rich and interesting history of its own. There's been a bunch of different theories of what hysteria is. In Mesmer's context, it was understood as a kind of psychophysical disorder caused primarily in women by an excessive buildup of humors in the uterus. So, So if the idea is that humors are like the waters on the earth and tides are the waters being affected by this invisible force, Mesmer's thought here, I think, is to manipulate the fluids of the body using something like gravity, in this case, magnetism. So the theory of electromagnetism was not well developed at this time. So he sort of runs together magnetism and gravity, but that's the idea. He's trying to integrate this idea of invisible fields of force affecting our body, and here he's using iron and magnets. So he tries this on a patient with hysteria, and the patient reports a kind of relief from her symptoms for a period of time. And Mesmer is quite interested in this. He thinks, however, that it's not just the magnet. So he doesn't attribute the success of this trial to just the magnet and the iron. He thinks that he personally has something to do with it. So he thinks he's got what he calls animal magnetism. So there's a kind of invisible fluid throughout the universe, which in living things is animal magnetism. And he believes that he's got a kind of, personally, he's got a lot of this stuff, right? So he's somehow in his work, he's sort of accumulated a lot of animal magnetism in his body, which allows him to manipulate it from a distance or from touch in the bodies of his patients. Okay, so you can see here, the kind of things he would be doing would be to sort of put his hands near or on a patient's body and manipulate their animal magnetism with his field of force. And people reported that they felt something. So when he would do this, sometimes he would call it magnetizing them, or I think he was largely called mesmerizing them. That's where that term comes from, mesmerize. So they would fall into a kind of semi-awake state and would report feeling in their bodies this kind of subtle fluid moving around, right? This subtle fluid streaming through their bodies, and it would affect a kind of release of pent-up, like what they would think of as humors. So and humors are, remember, psychophysical. They're both physical and psychological. Okay, so he's got this practice, mesmerism, where he's using his personal buildup of animal magnetism to manipulate the animal magnetism in his subjects, causing them relief from their symptoms often hysteria, not just that, but various symptoms. He thought he could cure people using this kind of like telekinetic animal magnetism force. Okay. So he moves to what at the time was kind of the center of medical innovation, which was Paris. So in 1781, he moves to Paris, where he tries unsuccessfully to get this practice certified by the kind of central medical authorities of the time. So he presents this to the top doctors in Paris, and they go, yeah, I don't think that's real. Now, notice that there's not really, I mean, when we're thinking about this, you might say, well, there's no force in physics that would make this make sense. But physics in 1781 wasn't at such an advanced stage that you could just easily say that. So they don't know for sure that it's wrong in the sense of like, look, that's just basic physics, that's not a real thing. But nonetheless, the top medical doctors at the time say, yeah, I don't think that's real. So when they refuse, he sets himself up in a kind of private practice. So he sets up a private clinic where he began treating people using mesmerism, training other mesmerists, and it became a kind of popular sensation. People loved this. People were really excited about the potential of this therapy, although when I say people, I certainly don't mean everyone. So there's a big debate in public. It becomes a kind of fad. And some people think it's the greatest thing ever. Some people think that it's obvious nonsense. Okay, so Mesmer moves on to not just doing single person sessions. These sessions can last hours. So he's doing group sessions of mesmerism. He used, this is believed to be an actual sort of instrument that he used. He would have this is sort of, I believe it's like a waist high big tub. In the tub are put bottles of magnetized water with little iron rods submerged in the bottle. So the bottle of water he's been manipulating it with his animal magnetism to charge it up with this subtle fluid. Put the bottle in this big tub, and then into the bottle is one end of an iron rod. And these you can see those sort of hanging off the side. And then individual subjects would come up and either hold the rod or have the rod sort of pointed at various parts of their body. Those rods, if you look at the top, are all linked up together, the thought being that the magnetic field of each of the individuals would kind of mutually reinforce, right? So you'd have this sort of synergetic effect of animal magnetism, all the people standing around this tub. And they would also be tied with a rope. The rope was understood to, the rope was understood to sort of connect them up and mutually enhance the power of the animal magnetism. Music would be played, ethereal music. And as I said, these treatments would go on for hours, and many people would have quite dramatic effects from this. So common effects would be, people feeling movement of the subtle fluids in their body, or people would start laughing or crying. They would have these kind of mini crises. And these mini crises were understood in the theory of mesmerism to be a kind of healing crisis, right? You've got some kind of the animal magnetism in your body is blocked up somehow. And when you undergo one of these sessions, you would sort of, you'd have a dramatic upwelling and unblocking of the subtle fluid, which would then be healing for you. Right. So, and it's reported that it would be kind of, when a bunch of people were standing around one of these things, it would be kind of contagious. When one person started having one of these healing crises, it was very likely that other people would start having the same, rolling on the floor, laughing, crying, screaming, very dramatic stuff. Okay, so there's the practice of mesmerism. All right, so this thing, as I say, is a popular phenomena in, newspapers are writing about it. It's the talk of the town in Paris, and there was a Royal Commission convened by Louis XVI to look into this, see if there's anything to this. And it was headed by somebody that you might have heard of. This is Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin was leading this commission, sometimes at a distance from America, but to try to do some experiments to figure out if there's anything to this mesmerism stuff. And this commission did some of the first blind tests. Okay, so here's the kind of thing that they did to try to test this out. So the subjects would literally be blindfolded, so blindfolded subject. And the subjects would be people who had been identified by mesmerists as good subjects. So they would have a mesmerist who was kind of cooperating with their investigation. They probably believe that what they're doing is a real thing, right? Like it has real effects. Based on the latest and greatest science of Isaac Newton, why wouldn't it be a real thing? So they would get subjects who have felt the movement of the animal magnetism in their body. They can be successfully mesmerized, and therefore would sort of believe that this is a real thing. And they brought them in to do these blind tests. So typically, animal magnetism would be directed to one part of the body or another. So the mesmerist would be, like holding their hand over somebody's arm, and they'd say, "Oh, I can feel it in my arm. All right." But when they blindfolded people, so what they did was they blindfolded some people and then had the mesmerist try the same thing. So the person can't see what's going on, and the mesmerist is trying to do the animal magnetism thing on their arm, and they say, "Where do you feel the animal magnetism?" And their answers didn't correlate very well with what the mesmerist was doing. So when they couldn't see the mesmerist holding his hand over some part of their body, they couldn't tell where the animal magnetism was happening. Whereas if you can see it, they're like, "Oh yeah, it's working. I can feel it in my arm." So, yeah. So very interesting. It's a blind test in the sense that the subject doesn't know where they're supposed to be feeling something. When they don't know where they're supposed to be feeling it, they don't feel it there. Similarly, they did a series of sort of 15 or so tests. This was one of them. They also had one where the mesmerist would be literally in another room, and the idea was that this stuff, animal magnetism, can pass through walls. Of course, it's everywhere. It's the sort of universal force. So, just on the other side of a divider, and then they'd have the mesmerist sort of try to move the animal magnetism, this sort of subtle fluid, and see whether the other person could feel it when they had no information about when they started and when they stopped. And there didn't seem to be much correlation between what the animal magnet or the mesmerist was doing and what the subject felt. They couldn't tell when they were performing the practice and when they weren't performing the practice. So, not great for mesmerism. The report of this commission was there's not really anything to this. But notice some things about this trial. So this is not like a modern double-blind placebo-controlled trial. It's not. It's blind. It's single-blind at best. So for one thing, the people in the Royal Commission, the very first experiment they did was have a mesmerist try it on themselves, right? The Royal Commission sat down and said, "Okay, mesmerize me. Do your animal magnetism. Magnetize me. Do your thing on me." And none of them felt anything. So they're going into this having personally tried the intervention that they're testing, which is not something that doctors do. Doctors don't, "Oh, we got a new medicine. I better take a big handful and see what happens." Like, doctors don't test on themselves, and we would consider it a contamination of the experiment if they did, right? Because then they've got preconceived notions based on their personal experience about what the medicine does. So that's a big difference. They tried this thing on themselves first. And second, there's nothing like objective data collection here, right? There's nothing like statistical methods. There's no sort of like large scale trials. So the number of subjects in these long list of experiments was typically low, a dozen or so, right? It was never more than 15 or so. And they're not randomized or placebo controlled in any important way. So most of what we would consider good experimental technique is absent here. All they've done is try out a blind test, not a double blind, not placebo controlled, and not randomized. So this didn't actually end the mesmerism fad, in case you're wondering. Mesmerism continued on after the results of the Royal Commission are published. Mesmerism continues to be a big sensation. In fact, the idea of performing mesmerism on blindfolded subjects gets taken up by the mesmerists themselves. So when they're traveling around sort of showing off this technique, they start adding in blindfolds. They say, okay, ma'am, please put on this blindfold and I will do my animal magnetism on you. And you don't know what's happening, but I'm sure that you'll feel it. And people did. So mesmerists actually integrate the idea of blinding their subjects into their performance, as it were, of mesmerism. It's fun, right? So yeah, they'd be blindfolded with cotton stuffed in their ears, but nonetheless, people would respond to this procedure. Okay, so Kapchuk notices how interesting it is that the first series of blind trials that he could find in the literature weren't on real medicine, which was understood to not need rigorous testing. So they didn't do these, they didn't immediately go, oh, we should try blind trials on all of our regular medicine. No, it was only this kind of exceptional and what was perceived to be weird, non-mainstream, non-canonical medicine that underwent this kind of rigorous blinded trial. So it was used to separate out fake medicine from real medicine. It was not at this point used to evaluate real medicine. So in the next video, I'll go through some more of the readings and we'll get up to the point where people start thinking about blinded trials as a good way to evaluate standard mainstream medicine.